So we'll just get started now. Just a little reminder to everybody that this session is being recorded, and we had over 100 people register to join us today, which is wonderful. We're really passionate about making sure this conversation is on everybody's priorities across all different organisations. So we really appreciate people signing up, whether you're here live or whether you are watching back. We hope that this is a really educational conversation, and I am honoured to bring together a panel of experts to have this conversation today as part of Dying Matters Week. My name is Lucy Carpenter and I lead the Compassionate Employers Programme at Hospice UK. My role is to work with organisations across the UK to review the way that they look after their employees and their customers facing terminal illness, caring responsibilities and bereavement. So a big part of what I do is looking at how we look after our people. And as part of Dying Matters this year, our campaign this year is all about the culture of dying matters. And as a society, we are not great at talking about death and dying, and that can become even more complicated when we worry about saying the wrong things or not understanding different faiths and different cultures. And so today is all about having an open discussion about what those different faiths and cultures look like, what those rituals look like, how different people mourn, and how as organisations we can collectively do better to support people through those really vulnerable moments in life. So I'm really excited to have two brilliant faith leaders here with us, Abdul and Alana, and also welcome Nasrin, who's a Global Wellbeing Lead at Deutsche Bank, and Heather, who is our HR consultant and bereavement lead at NatWest. I will pass over to each of you to kind of do your own introductions to get us started. And Abdul, maybe we'll start with you, if that's okay.
Yeah, hi everybody. My name's Imam Abdul Siddiq. I'm a Muslim chaplain at a prison in the northwest of England. I am also a non-executive director on a trust in Cheshire and Merseyside. And I'm the founder of the Flohesion Foundation, which works across Greater Manchester to deliver health, welfare, education and resettlement projects with members of the BAME community. Thank you for having me today.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Alana, would you like to go next?
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me as well. Lucy, it's an honour to be here. My name's Alana Harris. I am an Anglican priest. I lead the multi-faith chaplaincy at Canary Wharf. So we're a team of 11 and we offer spiritual care and faith advice both to individuals but also to companies in Canary Wharf. So on the company side, we are particularly supporting HR teams, wellbeing teams, diversity and inclusion teams, and we work with individuals as well. And bereavement is not the sum of what we do, but it's certainly one of the areas where faith and work overlap, and it's a privilege to work in that space.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Heather, would you like to go next?
Sure, yeah. I'm Heather. As you said, I work in HR at NatWest. That's my day job, but I also work on the Home Life Network, one of our employee-led networks. I'm the bereavement lead there, and the reason I got into that was because I lost my husband 11 years ago.
Thanks, Heather. It's great to have you with us today. And finally, Nasrin.
Hello, thank you so much for having me here today. My name is Nasrin Oskui. I'm the Global Head of Wellbeing at Deutsche Bank. I have written the bank's first wellbeing strategy. I'm in this role since October 21, but with Deutsche Bank 18 years. And our overarching goal is to integrate wellbeing into our day-to-day sustainable culture. So really integrating well-being into everything we are doing, the way we are leading, the way we're managing, the way we are working with each other, and the way we are working as well. And bereavement plays a huge part because unfortunately most of us will be impacted by it, and we can't just leave it at home when we go to work, and that's why it's such an important topic.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Nasrin. It's wonderful to have you here. It's always a pleasure. So just to remind people, we are recording today's session. There is the opportunity for Q&A at the end, so please do jot down any questions you may have along the way, any comments, any reflections. We welcome them all. You'll receive a follow-up sort of FAQ of any questions that we maybe don't get to today, but we will circulate that with the recording following today's session as well. We've broken this session into sort of 3 key areas, and as I said at the beginning, it's really about hoping that we can give you a little bit of education as well as some really practical advice from the experts that we've got today on today's panel. So Alana, I'm going to start with you. And during this first section, we're going to be kind of thinking about really understanding how different cultures and different cultural perspectives reflect in death and dying. So, Alana, can I ask you, how do different faiths and cultures approach death, dying, and grief? And do you know of any kind of common themes that maybe unite them?
Yeah, thank you. This is a brilliant and huge question. I think the first thing to say is that grief affects everyone really individually. Grief is such a personal process, and grief layers on grief, obviously. And so I'm not sure there are any hard and fast rules in how we talk about this. But of course, there are cultural trends, and those can go along with faith traditions. So I'm not going to try and do a deep dive on every single one, but I'll point out some hallmarks that maybe it's helpful to look out for. So the first is the importance of faith, the heightened importance of faith in moments of bereavement or approaching death and thinking about dying. So bereavement is a time when people might draw more deeply on their faith than normal. They might draw more deeply on the resources of a faith tradition that perhaps was latent, or they might question their faith. And so matters of faith are kind of closer to the surface at this time than they might otherwise be. So you might have an employee or a colleague that is showing up in a more religious way than you're used to, and that's just something to notice. Another thing I think would be to say that timelines and expectations around timelines can really vary. So the speed at which a loved one needs to be buried, the speed at which a funeral might need to take place might surprise you. If you've got one cultural assumption, it might surprise you to know how quickly somebody would be buried in another tradition. Or how slowly relative to your own expectations, and there are other kind of milestones and timelines that just differ between cultures. So I think a unifying thing is that anniversaries are important, and there are moments in time where we mark and remember deaths, but how exactly we do that differs. And then I think the third thing I would draw attention to is about the relational kind of networks that people sit in. I think an assumption that might be written into some of our policies and our kind of frameworks for thinking might be about nuclear families and significant bereavements being this person and this person and this person, and actually the rules around how we relate to people in faith communities might be quite different. Extended families might have much more profound connections and responsibilities to organise each other's funerals or be present in certain ways. And so I think that's another way difference might show up. But in terms of unity and unifying themes, grief and particularly shocking deaths and traumatic deaths, that transcends culture, and the way we can respond with compassion, that's another thing that transcends all cultures, really. Like compassionate response can be compassionate whoever you're relating to, and so it's great to be having this conversation today and exploring what that can look like.
That's great. Thank you so much, Alana. And I think that is so important to highlight from the top around that kind of grief not being linear, and actually respecting that it's not just about that initial bereavement period, but actually really respecting those mourning periods over the years, over the months that come, and how those different traditions and different cultures may show and celebrate those different the loved ones who have passed on. Abdul, can I come to you just to give a little bit more of a kind of specific example of how in the Islamic faith you approach death and dying?
Thanks for that, Lucy. I think Alana's given a very good backdrop to and setting to what we're talking about. I'm gonna just focus on the Islamic perspective and how Muslims approach death and dying. The Quran clearly tells us, "Kullu nafsin dha'iqatul maut, wa lanabluwannakum bisharri wal khairi fitnatan wa ilayna turja'un." So what the Quran tells us is every soul will taste death, and we test you, O humanity, with good and bad as a trial, then to us you will all be returned. So for Muslims, death is viewed as a natural transition to the afterlife. Death for us is not the end, it's the beginning. And as Muslims, we believe we will be judged by Allah on the last day and the day of judgment. The situ period, or the period in between that, is called the barzakh, where the soul enters a state of waiting between death and the day of judgment. So that sort of crystallizes the way Muslims approach death and dying. So when a person is near death, Muslim is about to pass away, the people around him will sort of try and sort of encourage him to say the testament of faith, the declaration of faith, which is the kalima, there's no God but Allah and Muhammad is the messenger. In terms of funeral prayer and burial, in Islam, the body is sacred. So what that means is, as Alana alluded to, some faiths would want the body to be buried straight away. So within Islam, we believe that the body is given to us from Allah, from God, and it needs to be returned to God in the same state. So understanding that, in Islam, we're not allowed to cremate the body, we're not allowed to do embalming, organ donations at times also is not allowed. And the way we approach the idea of death is that it's really a bridge. An Arabic poet, he says, "Al-mautu jasrun yusalul habib ilal habib." Death is a bridge upon which a lover travels to meet his beloved. So that's the sort of backdrop around which Muslims approach the idea of death and dying. When a person is sort of in the final throes of death and passes away, we try and make sure that the face is facing towards Makkah. And also the body, we try to make sure that we honor the body by closing the eyes, and also closing the mouth to make sure that rigor mortis, when it sort of kicks in, it doesn't sort of leave the mouth open. So that is sort of just an oversight of how Muslims approach death and dying.
Thank you so much. And I think it's so important to highlight those really important days leading up to somebody's death, and the importance of that community within that setting, and in a work setting especially, the importance of giving grace and respecting that time that an employee might need around both before that person dies and after that. So just coming on to Heather, I know you've done a bit of work in this space recently, so it would be really great just to hear a little bit more about the work that you've been doing at NatWest in terms of kind of respecting and making those adaptations for employees from different faiths and different cultures.
Lucy, just before we do that, I noticed there's some people having some technical issues with sound. I don't know if there's anything that anybody can do about that. Is it still happening? Can anybody hear us?
I'm hoping that some people can. Sound is a bit hit and miss.
Oh,
I can see one person has been struggling to get into the session. Okay. It may well be. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. I think we'll carry on, and hopefully we'll be able to get the recording out to anybody who hasn't been able to join live.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, so in terms of our wellbeing policies and general kind of HR policies, we do try and make everything as inclusive as possible, and sometimes that means having a policy that is fairly wide-reaching or high level, and then we really rely on our line managers to know their people know their people well, and have those open conversations about how best we can support them, whether that is sort of maybe caring for someone who's approaching death or after somebody has died. So we have various policies. We have a carers leave policy, which allows people up to 18 weeks of unpaid leave, but we also have dependents leave, medical appointment leave, etc., which is paid. In terms of bereavement, we have a 56-week period in which you can have 2 weeks of bereavement leave. Again, they can be taken flexibly to suit whichever tasks or traditions that somebody may want to observe during that time. But it is, as I say, about line managers being open and having those conversations. What we did introduce last year was a guide for colleagues and managers around supporting colleagues from different faiths around bereavement. So it is by no means all encompassing, but it does have a high-level view of some of the faiths that we see that we have a lot of representation from in the bank. And it just gives them an idea of those sort of timelines and those rituals and traditions that the two guys have been talking about, just so that it gives a bit of insight and they can have a little bit of knowledge as they go and speak to their colleague.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. And I think that preparation piece is so important, isn't it? If we can equip the line managers with the knowledge and the education so that they can actually be empowered in that conversation and not have to rely too heavily on the person who's going through it to fill in the gaps for them, that can be really, really powerful in terms of how you're showing up for that person. So actually it was when we connected, Heather, it was after the launch of that guide, and one of the big things that we try within the Compassionate Employers Programme to do is encourage the organisations that we work with to work with those networks within the organisation, because so much of that knowledge already exists in that lived experience and you can learn so much from them. So it's great to see your two networks, the grief network and the multi-faith network, coming together to create something that can be really impactful for the whole organisation. You know, hats off to you for leading that piece of work. Nasrin, I'm going to come to you. Deutsche Bank is a Compassionate Employers member, has been for a few years now, but you're a global provider, so you work across so many different faiths, so many different cultures. So just really interested to kind of hear your perspective as a global leader in this space in terms of how do you make sure that those policies aren't just kind of one size fits all, and make sure that compassionate culture is embedded.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So we're in 58 countries. You can imagine how many cultures and religions we have across the globe. But there are many elements how we can support and create the safe environment. So it really starts with creating an environment of psychological safety and empathy, where it's okay not to be okay, because we just heard grief and bereavement is not linear. You need to be able at any point in your grief journey really to say, I'm not okay, I'm struggling, I can't concentrate, I'm depressed, I need support. Right, so that is so important that we create this, and that applies to all religions and to all cultures. So that is our overarching goal, really. You know, people need to feel safe to talk to their managers, to their leaders, and also to their colleagues, right? Ask for support, because we can't just leave it at home and we take it with us to work. It's also about, you know, when you're not able to concentrate. I often hear when people are grieving, they're not able to focus or to concentrate. So this conversation needs to be had, right? I can't be on this big project at the moment, or I can't lead on this task force at the moment. That needs to be possible. So we are really empowering our managers. We've got a lot of development opportunities, including your brilliant resource, the Compassionate Employers tool, which I can only recommend to every employer, because you've got e-learnings on there. I know an e-learning doesn't sound super exciting, but it's so practical and it's so good. And we heard it before. I think when someone is bereaved, so many people don't know what to say. Everybody is stuck for words. They don't know what to say. And then worst case scenario, they don't say anything because they're afraid to say the wrong thing. So really those e-learnings enable you to have that conversation, to maybe just say, I don't know what to say right now. I'm really sorry for your loss. And that's brilliant. That's all we need, right? But we need to really engage our managers and our leaders in those conversations. And our colleagues, of course, because they are part of the team. So we've got a bereavement group, bereavement support group. So that's run by our mental health first aiders. That's just purely colleagues who are coming together twice a month, and they're talking, they're having a chat, they're sharing, and it's absolutely brilliant. And we've got really a great turnaround there. So people really enjoy being part of the community and just share it. And we are running a lot of workshops. We are running a lot of campaigns on psychological safety in general, just to explain what psychological safety means, because most people don't know what it means. What empathy means, again, most people don't know what it means. Those are the big words and buzzwords, and everybody thinks it means you have to be nice the whole time. No, that's not what it means. We also had our senior management talking very openly about grief and loss. So we had several panel discussions where they shared their journey with grief, where they shared how they felt during that time. And when you see senior leaders, they are setting the tone. They are telling us it's okay not to be okay. I've been there. I'm very senior. I'm very successful. And I have been there. And I did, talk to someone. I did take some time off, etc., to get better. And of course, we've got the normal policies that big corporates have for time away. But I think this cultural piece is key for every employer to create this environment.
Absolutely. And I think like one of the big things that we've learned whilst working with Deutsche Bank is that commitment to creating space for vulnerability, and actually knowing that transcends across all levels of the business, and that being a real key priority in terms of showing that it's okay to be vulnerable in this space. Your senior leaders are being vulnerable in this space, which automatically gives you more permission to be vulnerable. As a society, we generally look for people who give us that permission to be vulnerable. Otherwise, we are quite stoic, and especially in the face of challenging times, caring responsibilities, bereavement, it's a lot of kind of keep going, be strong. And so actually making that space for vulnerability in those conversations within organizations is something that we see has such huge benefits for employee engagement, for retention, for just general employee satisfaction in terms of that sense of belonging, that sense of psychological safety. So it's brilliant to be working alongside you with this program, but it's great to be looking at all the things that you're doing as well globally. And actually, I suppose that leads us on quite nicely into this kind of second section, where we're going to be talking a little bit about breaking the silence around death, dying and grief. Obviously, we know it's a massive challenge in society. And across lots of different cultures and faiths, it's a massive challenge as well. So Abdul, I'm going to come to you first, especially in terms of the kind of community elements and the community background and empowerment work that you do. So can you tell us a little bit about kind of the role that that community plays in death and dying in the Islamic faith? And, if there are any barriers to having those conversations, and maybe how we can support to break them down.
Yeah, so thank you for that. So within the Muslim community, death and dying, especially the process of death, it's a community orientated activity. So when a person passes away, usually what would happen is that they have the ritual washing, which takes place in the mosque. And what happens is that there's community members who are usually trained to wash the body according to the Islamic faith, and they will have support from the family members to do this. And then even with the mourning period as well, in the Islamic faith, we usually mourn for 3 days. And what happens is that the local community and family, friends, relatives will support the family during the 3 days, providing the meals for guests who come from outside to pay their respects and their condolences. They may even offer their houses for people to stay a night who've traveled from out of town. And then when we move on to the actual burial process, again, quite a community-based sort of activity. A lot of the Muslim community will offer the prayer, the funeral prayer, and then follow the deceased to the burial ground in the graveyard, and then make sure that they partake in the burial by possibly sort of helping to fill the grave with soil. And I put a note here. I remember when my mother and father passed away, we had around 150 community members who took turns to place half a spade of soil to fill the grave. So very community orientated sort of activity. But I do understand the sort of world we live in now. A lot of people don't have those networks, and a lot of people don't have that community because people are moving around for economic reasons. So I'm always sort of very interested to hear from other members of the panel how their communities are playing a sort of a part in breaking the silence around death and dying.
That's such an interesting reflection there, and it's something that we've been talking about quite a lot recently, in that, you know, with the movement of people and the fact that we traditionally don't necessarily live next to our family and our friends that we grew up with. We maybe aren't massive people in the community, and we find so much of that community at work now. That role, that shift of responsibility in terms of where you get that support from, is something that we're seeing more and more in conversation. So thanks for bringing that up. And Alana, I'm just going to come to you in terms of thinking about the kind of broader you know, lots of different faiths and cultures, in terms of, you know, what are the challenges and what are the struggles to address the subject? You know, do we see these kind of barriers? And, you know, if you have any advice on how we can support to break them down.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So I think we all find it hard, don't we, to think about death, to talk about dying, and to know what's okay to say, and I think that's common to all cultures and faith traditions. I think there are some differences though in how faith traditions handle these things, because if we think about these faith traditions that we have as these like repositories of wisdom gleaned over many centuries, many millennia, there is real wisdom there as to how we come to terms with our own mortality, how we cope with the loss of people that we love, and how we deal with these things communally. Like that's what a lot of these rituals and practices that we've been kind of glancing on, that's what they're about at their heart. And so I think there is capacity within our faith traditions to really help us to approach death and dying well. I know we've heard already from Abdul from an Islamic perspective. I know, you know, deeply from an Anglican tradition, and talking with a Jewish colleague as well, that there are moments in the sort of daily and weekly liturgies that remind us about our own mortality, about our limits, that sort of put us in perspective of thinking about the beyond and the divine, and that can be really healthy for coping in a real way with approaching death and dying. But it is absolutely true that it's difficult for all of us to talk about it, and you know, we feel vulnerable, we don't know what's okay. And I think in our increasingly diverse workplaces and diverse society, we don't always know whether it's okay to have a different opinion than someone else. We don't know if it's okay to disagree, and so we find silence as a solution. But in my experience in Canary Wharf, silence isn't the solution. Modeling good conversations and being okay to disagree and sort of offer perspectives that are different but can coexist together is a really healthy thing to do in our workplaces, and to be interested and curious about how somebody else approaches things, how somebody else thinks about things, and just allow space. So I think modeling conversation and listening and openness can really help us to break that silence culture. Yeah, that's what I would offer.
I can't agree more. I think that, one of our biggest challenges as a society is that so many of us have lost the skill of active listening and really learning to sit in uncomfortable conversations. And they don't necessarily have to be uncomfortable. You can learn so much if you're just willing to sit and go, this is going to, I'm going to learn something from this. And it doesn't necessarily mean that somebody has to be educating you, but you can be listening to their experience to then be able to go away and do your own research into what that might look like in a more practical sense. And the more we can do to kind of break down the barriers of having those conversations and actually just encouraging people to sit in that space with somebody whilst they're going through hardship is a really, really powerful thing. Even if you're not an expert on the culture they're from or the faith background they have, you don't have to be an expert. Saying something is often better than saying nothing. It's something that we hear all the time. I know, Nasrin, you've touched on it earlier today as well. And Nasrin, I'll just come to you quickly, actually, and we'll come to you, Heather, last, because I know you've got a personal story to share with us. But Nasrin, you're somebody who's really passionate about this. It comes across so well in everything you do. What are the benefits that you've seen as somebody who's been leading on this wellbeing initiative at Deutsche Bank for the last few years? Like, you must have seen some amazing results from creating this space that maybe previously didn't exist within the organization.
Absolutely. Let me try to bring it to life with a fictional example. So let's think about Lucy. She's a high performer, has been with the firm for 15 years, so has a very good network, and she has lost her mother recently. After her bereavement leave, she comes back to the office, but she's still not quite right. So she doesn't really, she can't focus. She feels really depressed and down. And she asks her manager to take her off a high intensity project because she's not okay. She's very open with him, struggles to concentrate. But also she doesn't want to be signed off sick. And you hear that very often. People don't want to be signed off sick. They don't want to be at home and be isolated, right? So they want to have their normal life, but we have to make adjustments. So the manager refuses. And as a result, Lucy signs off sick. When she returns, she disengages. Another term for this, we read it a lot at the moment in the press, is silent quitting. So you rock up to work 9 to 5, you're not engaged, you're not interested. And then after a year, she leaves the company altogether. So that's a talent who has been with a firm, lost, right? And that's a big problem. And that's why it's absolutely vital that we support employees in moments that matter, and that is a moment that matters, right? If the manager would have been supportive, Lucy would have done everything for him. She would have, when she would have had fully recovered, she would have been more productive, she would have been loyal, she would have stayed with the firm. So there is really not one reason why not to do it. It's going to increase productivity. It's going to increase retention, the engagement, attracting new talent for Generation Z. One of the top 4 decision makers is a well-being culture at their employer. So it's incredibly important, right? And as employers, we shouldn't really miss that. And at the end of the day, it's the right thing to do as well, right? So when people are healthy and when they're happy, they're more productive, and it's going to be a lot more fun working together as well. And our tagline for well-being is really our well-being is our success. And that is something we really firmly believe in. And that's why employee well-being is really not negotiable.
Absolutely. And yeah, thank you, Nasrin. I mean, it's so apparent in the way that Deutsche Bank kind of does everything well-being focused, and having it really embedded within the business strategy. I think, I often say, like, people never forget how you show up for them in their most vulnerable moments. And it's true, you can say the wrong thing, but actually if you're showing up for that person, and you're treating them with with respect and honouring the feelings that they're having during that time, they don't forget it. And we see that in employees' retention constantly. And I think really important to highlight, you know, the future of workforce, workforce well-being. We are seeing an aging population, more and more sandwich carers in the workplace, where people are having children later, looking after young dependents whilst they're looking after elderly relatives. We're expecting more and more people to die every year because of an aging population. The number of people impacted by life moments that are going to affect them during their working lives is only going to get greater. So it's the time to be investing in these sorts of, you know, this sort of support where you're training line managers with that skills, with those soft skills, to be able to have those conversations, to be able to support employees through significant life moments, whether they're personal or whether they're things like the global pandemic that happened and we all had to try and figure out how to support workforces through that. You know, compassion and, you know, employee focused programs are there for a reason, and they are to make sure that that kind of that support and that retention is there. So thanks very much, Nasrin, really great. And Heather, I'm going to come to you because as you shared at the beginning, you have a very personal reason why this is important to you, and it would just be great to hear a little bit more about kind of that impact and actually how you've used that in the last 10 years to kind of shape how you support other people in the workplace and outside.
Yeah, no, thank you. So yeah, as I said, I lost my husband 11 years ago to stomach cancer. He just turned 32, and I had as well. I say that I've been grieving him now for 11 years. I will continue to grieve him forever. But much to the example there, that the hypothetical story, mine was very real. You know, I had been at NatWest for 10 years-ish at the time, really enjoyed it. Like to think I was doing a good job. You know, this then hit. He was ill for a year and then he died, and the world was turned upside down. There was a stat that, you know, 53% of people would consider leaving a company if they weren't treated well at that sort of time. I was treated amazingly. I couldn't have asked for more. I was able to flex hours in terms of if there was work and sadmin work, I like to call it, or deathmin it's sometimes called, when somebody dies. There's a hell of a lot to do. So I was given time to be able to do that. I was able to, when I was caring for him initially, I was able to cut down my hours without sort of formally changing a contract, for example. And then when I came back to work after he had died, you know, my manager wasn't scared to talk about it to me. He didn't understand what I was going through, but he asked, and he said, "How are you feeling today? How's happening? What do you need to do? What do you need?" My workload was very much monitored, very much kept to what I felt I could manage. I did make the decision to reduce my hours formally, and I'm still doing that. So I work 4 days a week. That's 11 years on, but I still do that, and I see that as ongoing support. And it's true. I, you know, had a renewed loyalty to NatWest from that point, because that they sort of held me up when I was at my lowest. They enabled me to be at work, but to still live my truth, which was my outside world was falling apart. So yeah, so a few years on, you know, I was talking to some colleagues who'd also lost you know, significant people in their lives, and you know, we realised that actually in a workplace of our size, is a big company, there will be a lot of people at any one time going through this kind of situation, and we did want to normalise talking about it and normalise the fact that it can affect you anytime, any day. Sometimes you don't know when it's going to affect you. Something just happens that triggers you. You know, and we need people around us to understand that and to give us a bit of slack if that does happen at any point. So yeah, so that was why we set up the bereavement cafes that we hold monthly. We also have an annual Stars of Remembrance campaign, where it's a virtual night sky that we have. Colleagues can choose a star in the sky and light it up by leaving a message or a memory for a loved one. It's really popular. We get thousands of stars every year. And we hope that we all share the same sky, so we hope that everybody feels able to contribute to that if they wish to. So we do try and share the message like this sort of panel session, training sessions, other the cafes, our religious guide to supporting colleagues through grief, and really just keep the conversation going and try to get to as many colleagues as possible, so that if they or one of their colleagues has to endure this while they're at work, that they're as supported as possible. So we just want to keep talking about it, keep making sure that line managers particularly, I guess, are aware that their role in supporting a colleague is really, really important.
Thanks so much, Heather. And yeah, it's always incredible to hear your story. I've heard it a few times over the years at conferences, and it's amazing to know that you've taken such a tragic event and turned it into something so incredibly positive for so many other people. And that visibility is such a core component to making sure that people have that equal access to the support they need. And I think that's something that you've done so well at NatWest, and it's something that we can all definitely learn from. I love the stars idea. I love the idea that every year people can nominate somebody for those stars, because I think even those sorts of things where people can do things very quietly, it doesn't have to be joining a coffee morning where they have to sit through and feel uncomfortable in a space. They could do something that feels very personal to them, but also witnesses that person who they care about that they've lost. So really, really love that. We're just going to come on to the last sort of section. Hopefully we'll spend about 10 minutes on this and then have sort of 5 or 6 minutes for a Q&A at the end if there's any questions in the chat box. And this last section is all about kind of workplace support and inclusion. So really thinking about, okay, what does it mean to be supportive in this space, and what can we practically do to support employees from all different faiths and cultures? And Alana, I'm going to come to you first. So how can employers create a workplace culture that really respects diverse mourning and bereavement practices?
Thanks. Yeah, well, we've had some great answers to that already, actually, from my fellow panelists here. There's some great ideas we've already heard around the different resources that Heather and Nasrin in particular have developed, and the ways our senior leaders can set the tone for vulnerability in the workplace. I think I would just really underline listening, and being unafraid to ask questions about what an employee needs, what they need in this moment, what they might need next, and creating a culture in the space of safety, like Nasrin was saying earlier, psychological safety. One of the things we do as a chaplaincy is we offer a bereavement pack for managers, which helps them think about these things in advance, hopefully, of when they need it, and that includes how do you talk about the loved one that's gone? How do you begin to break that silence we were talking about earlier? And I think I would also just want to add that creating that culture requires proactivity in advance of the kind of moment of crisis. So an inclusive workplace culture with regards to different mourning and bereavement practices starts with an inclusive workplace culture, full stop. And so the work that we do on all the different kinds of inclusion, the work that we do on religious inclusion particularly, really shows up in this space. And we can be a little bit afraid of mixing faith and work, but I've seen it done really well, and I've seen it done really well in this space. And I would just encourage anyone who's not sure about that to maybe draw on the resources that Heather and Nasrin have been talking about, and to draw on what other resources are available to you. If there's chaplaincy available to you, draw on the chaplains. We're here to help. If you're in Canary Wharf and you're not already connected with the chaplaincy, drop me a line, because there are there are lots of resources out there, and we don't all need to be religious experts. The key is openness and readiness to encounter each other as humans.
Absolutely. And I think it's that piece that you say there around that kind of proactively leaning into these things and not doing it so much as a reactionary measure, which we see so much in this space around bereavement. And when people are struggling because they immediately go, oh my goodness, something's happened at work and I don't know how to deal with it, and there's a state of panic. If we can create organizations that are actually proactively better prepared to have these conversations, and like you say, there's so much out there, and perhaps we can circulate your bereavement pack as well to anybody who's registered as something that people can use as a tool as well. But yeah, really helpful. Thank you so much. And Abdul, I'm just going to come to you with a very specific question, really, around what kind of support you would like to see for Muslim employees who are maybe caring for loved ones, or people who are coping with bereavement. Is there anything in particular that you think you could highlight for employers to be really kind of focusing and thinking about?
Yeah, thanks for that, Lucy. So I've really got just 3 points that I think employers should consider. First one is around flexible hybrid working. So many of the Muslim community in the later stages of their life, they wish to die at home if possible. So what that means is that employees would be taking care of their loved ones and those who are end of life. So that's something which I think, as Nasrin and Heather have very clearly outlined, it's a sort of a win-win, not just for employees but also for employers. Having a healthy workforce, having their needs met, it will always increase productivity. First one is around flexible hybrid working. Number two, what we notice is Muslim employees may lean on their faith during bereavement, and that means that they may want time to pray at work. So having a quiet space at work, not just for Muslim employees, I think for all employees, it's a good investment. And a lot of offices now, we have hybrid working. There may be rooms that are available. It takes 5 or 10 minutes just to give, employees can take their break, pray at lunch. And just that small gesture, I think it goes a very, very long way, particularly when you have employees who, looking after their loved ones, someone's bereaved, they want to lean in on their faith. And there's that conversation, isn't there, that we want to be able to bring our whole person to work. And that will also improve productivity. So my second point is around being quiet, having a quiet place. And the third one, I think, is just a manager's asking the simple question during a catch-up or a monthly one-to-one. How are you and your family? When was the last time we sat down and asked our staff members that simple question? How are you and your family? We're always talking about targets, we're always talking about statistics, always talking about the next trend or curve we want to be ahead of. But just sitting back and just a manager or a senior leader sitting down when you have that monthly catch-up or meeting with your staff member, asking, how are you and your family? And that goes a very, very long way in supporting people. Thank you.
Absolutely. That's brilliant. Thank you so much. And I think, having that dedicated space, I think, a lot of organizations have kind of wellbeing rooms that double up as prayer rooms, or prayer rooms that double up as wellbeing rooms, but being really aware that actually, like, during a time that an employee is going through caring and being there for a loved one in those final days, really, really important just to recognize exactly like you say, that faith that they may well be leaning into more heavily than you maybe have recognized previously. So thank you so much. That's really helpful. Heather, I'm just going to ask you quickly around kind of policies. I know we kind of touched on it a little bit earlier on. So, and I know that we've touched on guidance and sort of what you do at NatWest. But yeah, has it always been this way? Have you done lots of work to get to the point where your bereavement policies now actually do more effectively reflect lived experience, and have you adapted them? Is that something that you've done, and kind of what have you learned from that, and in terms of the importance of that flexibility?
Yeah, I mean, our policy, to be honest, hasn't probably changed for a while. A policy is kind of just that a policy. It's kind of the basic requirement. It aligns to legal requirements and things. So the policy itself isn't very, very detailed, which sometimes line managers find difficult. But actually, it's because every situation is so individual. And it is really down to listening, empathizing, all the good stuff that we've spoken about before. And line managers really knowing their colleagues and understanding what's important to them, a faith if that is part of their the things that are important to them. I think managers, they fear kind of having the conversations, they fear what they can and can't prove. But I think it is, the reason that we keep things fairly high level is so that we can adapt to individual circumstances as we need. We wouldn't want a manager to feel stuck about what support they can give and not give. So, we want our HR team to be available. We want our bereavement team hopefully to be available to sort of share experience and share kind of what we think would be what good would look like in that circumstance. But I think it is about, as we've also said before, just keeping sharing the message and sharing the message about how important it is to support staff who are going through something like this, using the resources that are available, both kind of the bereavement guides that Alana was talking about. We have similar, but also kind of we have external kind of employee assistance programs, and just making sure managers are aware of all of that. So the whole support, I guess, is wider than the policy, but the whole picture is really, really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's really important to say that policies are a great backbone, and I would recommend everybody to have a compassionate leave policy. If you don't already have a compassionate leave policy, it's definitely something that you should invest in. But that comprehensive wraparound guidance is really, really crucial, especially because so much depends on discretionary measures by managers in terms of giving that flexibility to be able to accommodate for each of those unique experiences. And it's really important to have that discretion and to have that flexibility, but to be able to equip line managers with the knowledge and the guidance so that they know how they can use that policy is really important. And that kind of leads us on to our last question with you, Nasrin. You've obviously invested a lot into that line manager training, outside of compassionate employers, also into that psychological safety and making sure that people are having those soft skills to be able to lead on these conversations and lead with real compassion. So just would love for you to just elaborate any more on the work that you have done and the work that you are continuing to do in that space in terms of that investment into your line managers, and anything that you think employers should be looking into doing or following your footsteps in.
I think it's not only line managers, it's also leaders. So leaders are setting the tone from the top, and that's super important. I think every employer needs senior leaders to talk about this topic, to be visible on this topic. So we have created actually a top of the house engagement model, that's how we call it. And in every global divisional exco, so that's our senior leader team, in every division, we've got one wellbeing champion. And they are taking the topic of well-being into town halls, into their leadership meetings, into their offsite, not during World Mental Health Week, not during certain days. Normally, it's a normal agenda item where we speak about well-being. And that's super cool, because like this, you make it normal. You don't, acknowledge it only in October when everybody's talking about it. You talk about it all the time. And that's how it slowly integrates into our DNA. And then managers are our culture accelerators. That's how we see them. So our managers, they are with their teams every day, right? They have to manage the day-to-day. They have to be there and listen. First of all, you need to explain to managers the why. We just talked about that, the productivity piece, the engagement piece, etc. Because we are burdening our managers with a lot of stuff at the moment, and managers do feel stressed. So explain them the why, explain them what they get in return. It's a great investment, great interest rate. So after you've explained the why, give them practical tools, give them, those conversation starters, give them some guides, give them some toolboxes with, how do I manage someone who's neurodivergent? How do I manage someone who's going through grief? How do I manage a menopausal woman or someone who has fertility challenges? So we have created a manager wellbeing hub where you find all those resources. So if and when they can go onto this hub and they have like one pages, really easily lined out, no HR language, it's really practical, it's a toolbox, and that's super important, right? And what I also found, and that was a light bulb moment, there's this quote from Brené Brown where she says, listen, don't fix. And we had that in one of our manager workshops. And so many managers said, oh my God, I wasn't aware. I thought I need to fix the problem, because all of us want to always fix things, right? They want to make things better. But when someone is suffering from mental health challenges, as a manager, you're not going to make it better. You can make adjustments, you can support, but you're not going to fix the problem. And that is so important. So reiterate that. And what I also want to say is all of us are responsible to create a safe and an empathetic environment. It's not only leaders, it's not only managers, it's all of us. And that's also important. That's why we're saying we are democratizing well-being, right? Because as a colleague, we also must be there to support a colleague who's going through something. We must ask each other, how are you? And we must be prepared to listen as well. That's so important. And another advice is really, when it comes to bereavement, is the Compassionate Employers Program. We really enjoyed working with you and are enjoying it. And it gives us so much benefit, and it's so easy for us as well. It's a just plug-in resource, which is just brilliant all the way, and we get really good feedback. So really work with thought leaders in the field and leverage all this knowledge.
Thanks, Nasrin. Thanks for our little plug there at the end. That was very kind of you.
No, but I'm convinced. I wouldn't say it if I wouldn't be convinced.
No, I know. I appreciate it. And hopefully it comes across that we're incredibly passionate about this. This is all about kind of breaking down the barriers, about talking about these really key topics, and making sure that all employees have access to the support that they need. Unfortunately, so much of it relies on luck at the moment. It relies on your employer being prepared to have these conversations, to be prepared to be able to support you through really significant life moments, and many employers aren't. So it's really important to keep this conversation going, and it's been really, really insightful. I think that kind of continued development into line managers and leaders knowledge is really, really important. That power of connection through those bereavement networks and fertility networks, faith networks, all really important. And that greater visibility has been that kind of key string throughout this. It's all about, talking. It's about not being afraid of being with people in these really vulnerable moments in their lives, regardless of faith or culture. We are humans. I think somebody pulled that out in the Q&A. We didn't have any questions, just some reflections in there, but somebody said, Alana really put it perfectly. It doesn't matter which faith or which culture you're from. We are humans at the end of the day, and death is something which is a very uniting experience in that sense. And actually we all can play a greater role in looking after each other. So I really appreciate everybody for coming along today. Thank you for our panelists who have given us so much to think about, so much great knowledge. Has anybody got any kind of final reflections from the panel before we end the call, or any final questions, maybe just any last minute questions that might come in? No? Okay, perfect. Well, then you get a minute back. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us, and we will circulate the recording and any kind of follow-up after this as well by the end of the week. So thank you so much, everyone.